And attitudes are so important to the success in an organization. You know, we're all senior level management people here, and when you look at the people that are performing in your organization, isn't it true that your top performers have excellent attitudes and habits? Sure it is. But think about when we bring people into an organization, aren't we really more concerned about their knowledge and skills? I'm challenging you to not only look at knowledge and skills when you bring a person into an organization, but also assess for their attitudes and habits. You see, attitudes and habits are the multipliers of performance. Because when you stop and think about it, when you have to terminate someone from the organization, isn't it usually because of their attitudes and habits? You know, I was on an airplane the other day, and I was sitting next to a sales manager for a large organization. I asked him, how many people do you have selling for you? And he turned to me and he said, I have about 20%. And I went on to ask him, I said, well, what are some of the things that are keeping you awake at night? And you can only imagine what he told me. And isn't it true, as senior level managers in the organization, that most of your time is spent with those 80% underperformers versus really with the 20% who are performing well? So what's the answer? I say, why not look at that 80% and see what we can do to develop new attitudes? Because after all, attitudes are developed. So that means we can change current attitudes or develop further the ones that we have or create new attitudes. Even Patti LaBelle said, I've got a new attitude. So then, let's look at that 80% and look at some ways we can have an effect in changing their attitudes. And I'm going to talk about 3 ways here. The first way is through a concept called impact. You know, impact, well, let's say, for example, that your employees go to a motivational speaker and they hear some things and they say, you know, because of what that speaker said, I'm going to implement some changes in my life. That's impact. A negative way of looking at impact is, let's say a person goes to a doctor and the doctor says, unless you change the way that you're living your lifestyle, you're going to die. And that person says, well, I'm going to change my lifestyle. That's impact. In other words, it happens once, but it has an impact on that person forever. The second way that I'm going to talk to you about changing attitudes is a concept called space repetition. And space repetition, advertisers are very familiar with space repetition. We even learned our multiplication tables through this concept of space repetition. If I were to ask you, what's 2 times 2? You would say 4. What's 4 times 2? You would say 8. But attitudes can be developed through this concept of space repetition as well. What about the conversations that you're having in your organization, the training programs that you have your people involved in? Is it sending a consistent message over and over and over again that is conducive to building the attitudes that will allow you to take your organization closer to their goals? Or do you see conversations and training in your organization that's actually taking you further away from your goals?